creepy untold stories of the Appalachia and its ghosts. There's a lot of untold stories, there's a lot of stories told in these mountains. These mountains are as old as North America itself. The ghosts, which is creatures from the beyond, I think of through the fog and its ghosts. There's a lot of untold stories, there's a lot of stories told in these mountains. These mountains are as old as North America itself. The ghosts, which is creatures from the beyond through thick fog. In the dark whispers of the forests and screams and even crying, babies have been heard. The Native Americans seen through these mountains, especially the Cherokees and other native tribes that said, "These mountains are cursed, are the stories true or are they just myths?" I know there's sightings of the Wampus, Cat Boujon and Annie, the Lady in Pink of the Grove Inn Hotel, in the more, in the Giant Leech and so much more, and there is a ghost with a lantern that said the haunt. Some of the trails still trying to find their way.
The curse of the river, pausing frequently, watch the water, rolling over its rocks, just enjoying the peacefulness and quiet still to be found on its banks. But on the first night after he pitches his tent, settled in his sleeping bag, he may find himself tossing and turning, troubled by strange dreams. A beautiful dark-haired, dark-eyed woman walks in and out of his restless mind all night, and though the whole night through he dreams of nothing but her, he can never see her clearly. She always seems like she's a great distance away. He is woken before dawn by the sound of what he thinks is singing, but the sound soon vanishes as he waits in his tent for the light to come. When dawn comes, he cooks his breakfast, packs his tent, and makes way farther than down the river, moving more slowly than yesterday and still feeling groggy and dazed. He doesn't get as far down the river as he thinks he will. When the evening comes, he's glad to pitch his tent and lay down wrapped in his bag. There, he expects sleep to come easy after his exhausting day. But again his dreams are troubled by the vision of the dark-haired woman. Again he awakes to the sound of singing, but this time the voice comes at midnight, and the young man steps out of his tent to stand by the banks of the river. In the darkness of the sound persists a subtle, beautiful singing full of rich, melancholy, and precious longing. Enchanted, he lays down by the side of the river, and with the sound in his mind, his exhausted body gives in. He drifts off to sleep. When he wakes on the hard rocks, it's well past dawn, and he can remember from his dreams is that the woman was there again, and this time she seemed much closer. The French Broad River, where it flows near Paint Rock, North Carolina. On the third day he walks even more slowly than the last, and when he gets a certain bend in the river where the water collects in a deep pool, he finds himself unwilling to move from the spot. He pitches his tent well before dusk, sits by the river to wait. As twilight descends into night, the young man doesn't go inside of his tent, but still sits by the side of the river, staring into the deep waters of the pool. As night comes to its own, the young man hears the sweet singing once again, more incredibly beautiful than any voice he has ever heard. And as the voice grows louder, it seems to be coming from the pool of dark water by his feet. As he looks into the pool, he seems in the form of a beautiful dark-haired woman rising out of the water towards him. She is naked and more perfect than he could have imagined. Smooth curves of her body seem to repeat the slow, smooth curves of the river, and he knows that she is singing to him. Unable to resist, the young man reaches into the water to touch the woman, but as her hand wraps around his, it's not warm flesh, then he feels but cold, rough, and slimy scales, claws that dig painfully into his arm before he can pull away. Before he even has a chance to scream, the cold grip pulls him into the dark water, and he disappears below the surface to his doom. Another young life lost to the siren French Broad. A little history of this story. The story of the siren of French Broad first appears to print in 1845 as Tzala, Tradition of the French Broad, a 64-line poem by William Glore, since published in his Southern Western magazine, but is more widely known from the 1896 retelling in Charles Montgomery Skinner's Myths and Legends of Our Own Land. One of the most puzzling mysteries of the French Broad River itself is why exactly the name first appears in official records in 1777. It may come from the fact that with Treaty of Paris that ended the French and Indian War in 1763, all waters that flowed into the Mississippi Basin were deemed French territory. The French Broad flows west into the Tennessee River, which eventually joins the Mississippi, and so the name might have been given around that time. There was also another nearby river that had been named the Broad River, so the French could have been added to help defy it from the nearby Broad River. Skinner reports that the Cherokee name for the river was Tuscalia. This may be more a product of Skinner's imagination. The Cherokee language, Cherokee naming conventions also differed from Europe ones, along with Eastern Native American naming conventions in general, in that the Native Americans tend not to give single names to entire rivers, but instead gave individual names to physically important features along the river. This approach certainly makes more sense if you're traveling along the river instead of looking at it on the map, but it was the source of miscommunication between the Europeans conducting their surveys and the Indians being asked the questions. The Europeans thought they were asking the name of the whole river, while the Indians were usually given the name the most convenient feature in this way. The names of the many smaller features transferred themselves onto entire rivers not too distant. Hazawizi River derives the name from a Cherokee word meaning stone wall for a landmark, perhaps built by the Moon-Eyed people. The U.S. Board of Geographic Names has recorded several different names for the French Broad, including Politico, Seneca, and Tarowski, all of which may be features of the river while identified as forever lost. Still, the name as we have it is a fine one and reminds us of what seems like an portable time when part of North Carolina was French territory. The Wampus Cat. Strange things happen in the mountains at night. Deep down in the valleys, mysterious noises echo through the darkness. Terrifying howls travel from hill to hill. Something is roaming through the night. Animals disappear from the farmyards. The random things left out in the yard at night, buckets, rakes, clothes hanging on a line, are knocked over or even destroyed. The folks who live in the hills hide in their homes. They know that what is whenever anything usual happens in the night, whenever mysteries calls are heard, they say that it's the Wampus Cat. They say the Wampus Cat was once a beautiful Cherokee woman. Her husband would often leave the village with her other men to go out hunting and bring back food before each trip. The men would gather the woods to ask forgiveness for the lives of the animals. They were about to take and seek supernatural help in their task, but women were forbidden from ever seeing these scared rites. This woman's curiosity consumed her. She wanted to know the secret magic. She begged and begged her husband to reveal the rites to her, but he always refused. So one night, as the men set out into the forest, she took matters in her own hands. The woman wrapped herself in a cougar skin and quietly crept through the woods. She came upon the clearing in the forest. When the men had gathered, she hid behind a rock and watched and enthralled, finally seeing the secrets she had so long desired to see. She crept closer and closer to the men in the circle, wanting to take in every detail until she got too close. The sorcerer leading the ritual spotted her and immediately saw through her disguise. The men of the tribe grabbed her and dragged her into the circle. Vintage postcard of the typical cabin home in the Appalachians. As punishment for breaking the taboo, the sorcerer cast a spell on the woman. The cougar skin she had wrapped herself became her own skin. She became a strange mix of cougar and human, and was cursed to live forever alone in the woods, never again join human company. And so the Wampus Cat roams the Appalachian Mountains at night, traveling up and down the hills and out of the valleys forever, wandering ever alone in the mountains. There are some who say that when she steals animals or ruins things on the farm, she's acting out of her anger and resentment from being cut off the rest of mankind. These are some who say that she will roam the mountains forever, lurking around the places where men live but never able to rejoin them. So whenever those strange cries are heard at night, whenever something gets disturbed in those little settlements, the hills, whenever an animal goes missing from a farmyard, the mountain people who know who is to blame, the Wampus Cat is walking through again. The word compass cat communicated one multiple meanings. Several Americans the Wampus Cat first came to attention of the world outside the mountains in the first half of the 19th century. Although at the time it wasn't the Wampus Cat people who were talking about the cat wampus, which was a word used to describe the idea of an unknown animal lurking in the woods as something to blame in any unusual event. The word cat wampus is communicated one has multiple meanings in several American dialects, including a defining mysterious animal describing something that placed on a corner as a term describing something that's just messed up or gone awry. The last usage was noted by folklorists in the 19th century, being particularly North Carolinian use of the word, although it was nice spread more widely across the southeastern U.S. Cherokee women first started appearing in the 20th century, long after wampuses began roaming in the woods. There are another twist to this history of the Wampus Cat in North Carolina, this time a little further down from the mountains in Johnson County along the Neuse River. Based in the spring of 1964, there were a number of reports of an ape-like creature roaming the woods near Dens Crossroads, located in US 70, about halfway between Smithfield and Princeton. Multiple people reported seeing an 8-foot-tall hairy ape man roaming the woods. The Goldsboro News Argus called the animal a Wampus Cat. The name stuck. Hundreds of people flooded in small towns searching for the beast, till the sheriff was forced to call the hunt, fearing for public safety and declaring the whole thing to be a hoax. It's a story which recalls North Carolina's greatest monster flap, the vampire beast of Bland Bordeaux. The Legend of Tom Dooley. In 1866, a woman named Laura Foster was murdered in Wilkes County. A man named Tom Dooley, pronounced Dooley, was convicted and hanged for the crime. That murderer and the name of Tom Dooley live on in one of the most famous folk songs ever to come out of North Carolina. The traditional version of the story cast Tom Dooley as dashing, handsome Confederate veteran. When Dooley returns from the war, he meets Laura Foster, a young woman who was being courted by a school teacher from the north by the name of Bob Grayson Foster. Fell in love with Tom Dooley, but so did another woman, and Ann Melton. Melton was married, wealthy, beautiful, and insanely jealous, learning that Dooley was in love with Foster, not her. Anna Melton stabbed Laura Foster to death in a jealous rage. Tom Dooley was blamed for the murder. Dooley fled here, heading for Tennessee. Bob Grayson headed a post to hunt down Tom Dooley, and the possessed dragged a fugitive back to Wilkes County. Dooley realized that it was Anna Melton who had committed the crime. Tom Dooley's sense of chivalry made him unwilling to see wealthy women dishonored and facing death by hanging. So Dooley confessed to a murder he did not commit in order to save Melton's reputation. On May 1st, 1868, Tom Dooley was executed for the murder of Laura Foster. Grayson returned home to North, and Melton went slowly insane from guilt. And years later, as she was on her deathbed, the trees around her house filled with black cats, and the air was filled with the smell of burning flesh as demons came to take her soul to hell. It's the version of the tale. It's a complicated story that ends in death of an innocent man, that became immortalized in a folk song that circulated in North Carolina for nearly 100 years, before it was made nationally famous by the Kingston Trio in 1958, in a way which shows how much the ways in which we define music categories has changes in the past half century. The Kingston Trio, recording the ballad of Tom Dooley, reached number 1 on the Billboard R&B charts, even higher its near top placement on Billboard's country charts. It's said that Tom Dooley wrote this song himself. The legend was in that he that was singing it, strumming along on his banjo as he sat on top of his own coffin, riding the wagon on the way to his execution. But the actual history behind the story of the Tom Dooley and the murder of Laura Foster are what might be generously described as slightly different from how the song tells it. More about the story, real story of Tom Dooley and Laura Foster is a lot more complicated than the version told in the song, and involves a lot more feels. Tom Dooley was born in deeply in Voish Mountains surrounding the Yalkin Valley in 1845. Sometimes when was a very young teenager. He began sharing the household of James Melton and his wife Anne. Melton was a successful cobbler and had lost interest in his much younger wife, who had happened to be about the same age as Dula. With James Melton's consistent, Tom Dula and Anne Melton began sharing a bed in Melton's cabin. James Melton slept alone. Dula left the Melton household temporarily when he volunteered for the 42nd Regiment of the North Carolina Infantry. After the war, he returned to the hills and resumed his unusual household agreements, but then things began to get even more emotionally complicated. Pauline Foster, a distant cousin of Anna Melton, had moved into the Melton household when she was hired as a servant. It just has been in a small cabin, because soon Dula and Pauline Foster began having an affair in a remarkable display of open-mindedness. Anna Melton didn't object to her lover's new arrangement. In fact, she joined in, so Anna Melton, Pauline Foster, and Tom Dula were all sharing a bed in James Melton's cabin. James Melton was still sleeping alone. And now, they say, his ghost roams the mountains, the Appalachia Mountains. The giant leech. There's a spot near Murphy at the far western edge of the state that the indigenous Cherokee named the Leech Place, because this seemingly quiet spot on the Valley River was where something dangerous and strange could be found. The story begins a long time ago at a place in the Valley River just before it joins the Hewisia here. There's a thin ledge of rock running across the river, which is just passable as a bridge, but just below this natural bridge there is a deep hole in the river, a place where the water disappears into cold darkness. All of this overlooked by a high range on the south bank with a trail running across that offers a clear view down into the river. It's along this path that a small group of Cherokee men were walking. As they looked into the river below, they noticed something strange. It was a large red something as large as the house sitting on the rock ledge in the river. As they wondered what it was, they saw slowly begin to move and unfurl. It stretched out its long, flat, fleshy body along the ridge like a ribbon until they could see that it looked like a leech. A giant leech whose body covered almost the whole of the ridge that bridged the river. It was a bright red with white stripes running along its body. The thing lay on the rocks for some time and then slithered down into the deep hole in the river. The men were outstanding, and even more so when the water beneath them began to bubble and foam almost as if there was boiling, and then a giant water spout shot up from the pool, strong enough that it would have swamped the men into the river. They hadn't been wary and ran as soon as they saw it coming. This was the leech's trap. It would wait into the depths of unexpected people to walk along the ridge and then send out the water spout and suck them down into the river. Many unwary people died this way, and their bodies would be found later lying by the side of the river with their noses and ears eaten off. The Cherokee who lived in the area soon began to avoid taking the path out to fear of becoming the creature's next victim. But not everyone was so cautious. There's the story of a young woman who was walking with her baby by the river and decided she wanted some fresh fish to eat. She walked out along that ridge in the water and sat her child down on the exposed rock, preparing to cast her line into the water. But the river began to bubble and foam, and she grabbed her child and ran out of the way just as the whole ridge was magnified in anger, foaming water. The other story tells of a young woman who wasn't so lucky. He laughed at the story and said he would show everyone in the town that it was nonsense, so he let off towards that spot on the river, singing about how he would wear leech skin leggings. When it was all done, he walked boldly across the ridge, overlooking the river, with many people from the town gathered, watching to see what would happen. He got halfway across before the water started to bubble and foam, and a water spout shot up, dragging him down into the river. He was never seen again. The place the Cherokee called Tintius is still there. It's said that even today you can look down into the river and see something moving in the deep hole in the water. But if the water starts to bubble, best to move out the way, and fast. The Pink Lady of the Grove Park Inn. Asheville's Grove Park Inn, as well as avoid reputation as one of North Carolina's premier hotels, first opened in 1913. The Grove Park was built by Edwin Willie Grove. Grove had a fortune selling Grove's tasteless chill tonic throughout the South. Tasteless in this case was a good thing. A professional Grove tasteless chill tonic was advertised effectively discussing the unpleasantly bitter taste of its active ingredient. Queen at Grove's tonic proved enormously popular in an era when malaria was still a highly problematic disease in the southern United States. Grove came to Asheville on his doctor's advice, as Asheville and the nearby towns were popular health resorts at the time. Grove enjoyed the town so much he decided to stay, seeing the healthy tourist business and not being one to pass up an opportunity to make money. Grove and his friend and son-in-law Thomas Seeley began construction on the Grove Park Inn. The inn was built to revive finest hotels in America. The inn has remained in conscious operation since Grove first opened it. George Garrison, Harry Hundy, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and even President Obama have all stayed at the Grove Park, known as for its elegance and comfort. The Grove Park hosts several world-class restaurants and superior spa on site. It's a beautiful, relaxed, and romantic inn that you would never want to leave. And according to legend, one guest never did leave. The Pink Lady is the Grove Park's Inn resident and much-loved phantom. This kindly spirit has been seen and felt in the halls of the inn for nearly 100 years. She's said to be the spirit of a young woman who fell to her death from a balcony on the fifth of the inn in the 1920s. She is usually seen in the form of a pink mist or sometimes as a full-flagged apparition of a young woman in pink ball gown. These are the various stories about who this young lady was and how she met her end. Some say that she had come to the inn for a contested evening with married lover and that she threw herself from the balcony when he called an end to their affair. Others say she was a young Dabinian who accidentally slipped and fell to her death. Whatever her origins, the Pink Lady is agreed to be a good-natured, even a kind spirit. She seems to particularly enjoy the company of children and seems a little more willing to reveal herself to them than to adults. She has been seen by the beds of children who were taken ill during a stay at the inn, speaking softly to them and gently stroking their hands. In one famous case, a doctor who had been staying with his family at the Grove Park left a note when he checked out asking the staff to thank the lady in the pink ball gown, and that his children told him how much they enjoyed playing with her during this stay. The Ghost Park Pink Lady is also said to enjoy playing small pranks. She's been blamed for lights, air conditioners, and other electrical devices turning on and off by themselves. She seems to enjoy rearranging objects in the rooms, and it's also been said that she occasionally wake up a sleeping guest with a good tickling on the feet. While she has been seen all around the inn, the spirit seems particularly attached to room 545. According to traditions, it was from the balcony off to this room that the young woman fell to her death. The inn's employees are used to the presence of the Pink Lady and treat her as just another part of tradition of the grand old hotel. The story of Booham and Hootenanny. Eagle Nest Mountain stands at the southern edge of the Blossom Mountain Range and was once home to the luxurious Eagle Nest Hotel, built in 1900 by Mr. S.C. Satterwhite of Waynesville. Guests hotel soon began to hear the story of a strange creature who lived in the area. The thing was not quite a man, not quite an animal. It stood about 8 feet tall, and every inch of its body was covered with shaggy gray hair, except for its human face. The creature was named Booham, and he seemed to be harmless enough, but he did have all too human habits. The first of these was the Booham was greedy, and he loved the hoard gems. Rubies and emeralds are found naturally throughout the mountains of North Carolina, and Booham loved to hunt for these pretty precious stones and hide them away in his own treasure hoards. Being a 30-50 mountain type, he would scoop up the discarded liquor jugs thrown away by tourists and fill these with his gems. He would then bury them in one of the secret caves on the mountain that only he knew where the whereabouts of. Bohem's other bad habit that made him a little more man than human was that he loved to look at pretty girls. Back in the days, a young woman who wanted to have a bath might head off into the woods and to find a scheduled pond at base of a waterfall. These are safe from the human eye. She could strip down to her naturalness and go out about her getting herself clean. But Bohem seemed to have some kind of sense about what was going on, and a young woman enjoying herself in the water would often hear a rustle in the bushes and look up to see his hairy face peering down at her. Now, most of these girls would quickly gather up their clothes and run off back home as soon as they saw him, but one young woman named Annie was braver than most, and one day when she was bathing in a stream deep in the balsam groves on Eagle Nest, she looked up and saw Bohem staring down at her, but Annie didn't run. In fact, she looked into Bohem's sorrowful eyes and saw that, above all else, he was just another lonely soul living on the mountain. Annie fell in love with those sad eyes, and she fell in love with Bohem. She left her home and her family to go and live with Bohem deep in the mountains as his wife. As much as Bohem loved Annie, and as much as Annie loved Bohem, Bohem still hung on to his love of jewels. On certain nights, he would leave his bride alone and go searching for jewels on the mountain. Annie, growing lonely, would go out and search for Bohem. On certain nights, he would leave his bride alone and go searching for jewels on the mountain. Annie, grown lonely, would go out in search of Bohem. She developed a particular holiday, something that sounded like a cross between a monkey and a hooting owl, that she would use to call out to Bohem. Bohem would use the same cry to call back to her. Eventually, the two calls would come closer together until they came together on the hills. Annie and Bohem calling to each other was often heard by guests at the Eagle Nest Hotel. Folks, John Parisi said that Annie's howl like a holler was the source of the term Hoot Annie, which appeared in the language around the turn of the 7th century and meant any kind of party to get together. It was in the 1960s when the term was introduced to the wider public by Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie that came to mean specifically a gathering of folk musicians. And Annie's approach accounting a giant shaggy beast was to marry him as testament to well-known friendliness of North Carolinians. It made that Annie and Bohem had children for occasionally, even to this day, a shaggy ape-like creature is seen in the balsam groves of Haywood County.